Just before dawn in Aurora, Texas, the town was still half asleep. The roads were quiet, and the fields around the little community sat under the gray edge of morning. On Judge J. S. Proctor's property, a windmill stood in the open air. It was the kind of ordinary landmark people passed without thinking, until a newspaper story turned it into the place where history supposedly came down out of the sky. Then, according to the story printed 2 days later in the Dallas Morning News, a strange airship came in low over Aurora. It was not described as a bird, or a meteor, or a balloon drifting peacefully with the weather. It was an aircraft of some kind, a machine with a pilot, moving badly, apparently damaged or out of control. It passed over the town, descended toward Proctor's place, and struck the windmill with enough force to tear itself apart. The article said pieces of wreckage scattered across the property. Some of the material was described as unusual, not quite ordinary metal, not something the townspeople could easily place. In the ruin of the machine, the story claimed, they found the pilot. The body was badly damaged. It was said to be small, strange, and unlike the men who gathered around it in the Texas morning. A man identified as T. J. Weems, presented as an officer in the signal service, reportedly looked at the remains and made the line that would keep the story alive for more than a century. The pilot, he suggested, was not an inhabitant of this world. Maybe, he said, it had come from Mars. The townspeople did not send the body to a laboratory. They did not call a national investigation. In the newspaper version, they gave the dead pilot a Christian burial in the local cemetery, as if even a visitor from somewhere beyond Earth deserved a grave. If that sounds familiar, it should. The ingredients feel eerily familiar now. A crash craft, strange wreckage, a dead non-human pilot, a rural town, a burial, and later stories of missing evidence. Decades afterward, people would come back to Aurora trying to find the grave and prove that something had happened there. It sounds like Roswell, but this was not 1947. It was 1897. There were no flying saucers in the newspapers yet. There were no jet aircraft, no atomic age, no Cold War radar screens, no official language of UFO sightings. The Wright brothers had not made their famous flight at Kitty Hawk. Most Americans had never seen a controlled, powered aircraft because, in any practical modern sense, one did not yet exist. And still, in a small Texas newspaper story from the spring of 1897, the pieces were already there. The sky had opened. A craft had fallen. A body had been found. The evidence had become uncertain almost immediately. Before America had the airplane, it already had the shape of the mystery.
This is Tom Mackenzie, and you are listening to Unexplained History. Tonight, we are going back before Roswell, before flying saucers, before the language of modern UFO culture had really been invented. We are going to a moment when Americans were looking up at the night sky and seeing something they could not quite name. Here is what makes the mystery airship wave so strange. Aurora is not just one odd newspaper item from Texas. It belongs to a chain of reports that moved across the country, from California to the plains to the south, gathering lights, pilots, secret inventors, Martians, and impossible machines as it went. The question is not only whether one of those airships was real, it is why America was ready for the idea in the first place.
To understand Aurora, we have to leave Texas for a while and go back several months to California, where the first great light of the panic began to move through the newspapers. The Aurora story would become the most cinematic version because it gave the airship a crash, a body, and a grave. But the wave itself began with something simpler and more unsettling, a light in the sky moving as if it had a purpose. For people in the 1890s, that mattered. The night sky was not empty of mystery, but it was also not yet crowded with aircraft. A moving light overhead did not have a ready-made category. It was not automatically a plane. It was not a helicopter. It was not a satellite or a drone. A strange light in 1896 asked the witness to do something harder. It asked the witness to imagine what the future might look like before the future had arrived. On November 17, 1896, people in Sacramento, California, began talking about a brilliant light in the evening sky. Some accounts placed it above the city. Others described it moving with intention, not drifting like a loose balloon. Witnesses said it carried a powerful light, or perhaps several lights. In some retellings, voices came from it. In others, the object was high and distant, more impression than machine, but still too strange to ignore. The next day, the newspapers had a story. The first important thing about the airship wave is that it did not move only through the air, it moved through print. A witness looked up, a reporter wrote it down, and a compositor set the type. Another paper reprinted the account, sometimes with changes, sometimes with a little more drama than the first version carried. By the time a reader encountered the story over breakfast, the light had already become an event. The Sacramento Bee reportedly added a detail that made the whole thing feel less like a ghost story and more like a technological secret. A telegram appeared, supposedly from a New York inventor. The sender claimed the machine was his. He had built an airship, he said, and was flying it west. The claim did not solve the mystery. It gave the mystery a workshop, a name, and a reason to keep spreading. In the 1890s, the idea of a hidden inventor was almost plausible. This was an America electrified by machines and rumors of machines. The telegraph had changed distance. The telephone had changed voice. Electric lights were remaking cities. Newspapers followed inventors the way modern media follows tech founders, and the public understood that a breakthrough could appear suddenly, dramatically, and with one man's name attached to it. If someone said a secret airship existed, many readers did not have to imagine magic. They could imagine a workshop, a barn somewhere, a warehouse near a rail line, a shed full of canvas, wire, brass fittings, batteries, propellers, hydrogen bags, and a brilliant searchlight mounted at the front like the eye of the new century. That image mattered because it gave the story a place to live. The airship did not have to be supernatural. It could be hidden technology. And hidden technology was one of the most seductive ideas of the age. A farmer did not need to understand the chemistry of a battery to know that electricity had become real. A shopkeeper did not need to understand every patent dispute to know that new devices were changing the streets. A child could stand under a lamp or hear a telephone described and feel that yesterday's impossibility had become today's object. The airship entered that mood. It did not ask people to abandon the modern world. It asked them to believe the modern world had one more secret room. Within days, the California reports widened. On November 21st, a bright light was reported from Sacramento again, and from other towns across the region. Folsom, San Francisco, Oakland, Petaluma, Santa Rosa, Sebastopol. Some summaries describe thousands of people looking up across the Bay Area and the surrounding counties, though the exact number belongs to the atmosphere of the reports more than to a census of witnesses. At the Cliff House near San Francisco, stories said the seals around the rocks reacted to the light. That detail may sound almost too perfect, but it shows how these accounts worked. The sky mystery was not only seen by people, it disturbed the landscape. It made animals move. It brought the strange thing down into the physical world. The more details a story carried, the more real it felt. A light was interesting, but a light that frightened seals gave the report texture. Add a hidden inventor behind it, and the story began to feel less like a sighting and more like a secret breakthrough slipping into public view. Newspapers did not need to prove the airship. They needed to make readers feel that everyone was talking about it. Once that happened, the next sighting had a frame waiting for it. A person in another town might look up, see something bright and moving, and reach for the new word that had just entered the public conversation. Airship was the word that did the work. It was modern enough to be exciting and vague enough to hold almost anything. It could mean a balloon with machinery attached. It could mean a dirigible. It could mean a flying craft no one had seen before. It could be round, cigar-shaped, winged, luminous, silent, humming, enormous, or barely visible. The word gave the unknown a machine body. On November 22nd, the story grew more intimate. Near Knight's Ferry, 2 Methodist ministers reportedly encountered a fiery object on the ground. They approached it. They saw it rise and depart. That was a different kind of sighting. Not a light far overhead. Not a rumor from another city. A landed object. Clergymen as witnesses. A moment of approach, followed by sudden departure. The airship was no longer only passing over America. It was touching it. A panic becomes durable when each kind of listener finds something to hold. The technology-minded reader gets the secret inventor. The religious reader gets ministers in a field. The spectacle-minded reader gets crowds in city streets. The rural reader gets a thing overhead that might land near a farm. By itself, any one report might have faded. Together, they began to form a map.
Here is the part I keep coming back to. In 1896, people did not have a normal explanation ready for lights moving through the sky. Today, we can reach for aircraft, satellites, drones, weather balloons, military tests. Back then, a strange light had more room to become a story. And once a story has a name, it starts recruiting evidence. Someone sees a light. Someone else hears a rumor. A reporter adds a line about an inventor. Suddenly, the country is not just watching the sky. It is watching the future and wondering whether somebody has already beaten everyone else into it.
That future was not imaginary. It was close enough to feel real, and far enough away to remain mysterious, which is exactly the dangerous distance where legends grow. The mystery airship wave did not appear in a world that knew nothing about flight. Part of its power comes from that timing. People in the 1890s were not medieval villagers staring at the sky with no mechanical vocabulary. They knew about balloons. They knew about experiments. They knew that inventors were trying to make lighter-than aircraft steerable, reliable, and commercially useful. Decades before the California sightings, Solomon Andrews had demonstrated the Ariane in New Jersey. Frederick Marriott had shown a small craft called the Avatar Hermes Jr. in California. These were not continent-crossing machines, but they were enough to prove that the dream of controlled flight was not pure fantasy. Airship schemes appeared in newspapers. Patent talk circulated. Public demonstrations drew attention. Some inventors promised what they could not yet deliver, but promise itself was part of the atmosphere. The late 19th century trained people to expect the impossible to arrive with bolts, wires, gears, and a confident man explaining it to a reporter. That atmosphere gave the sightings their power. If the airship had appeared a century earlier, it might have been folded into older folklore. A fiery omen, a heavenly sign, a phantom carriage, a marvel sent to warn the people below. In 1896, it became an invention. The shift matters because the witnesses and newspapers were not only reporting strangeness, they were translating strangeness into the language of progress. A light became a searchlight. A shape became a hull. A noise became a motor. A mysterious pilot became a secret engineer. The invisible workshop behind the story was almost as important as the craft itself. Imagine a reader in Sacramento or Oakland sitting at a table with a newspaper spread in front of him. The article says a strange machine has been seen at night. It may belong to an inventor from the East. It carries electric lights. It can move with control. It may soon be revealed to the world. That reader does not have to believe in visitors from another planet, at least not yet. He only has to believe that someone, somewhere, has built the future in private, and that idea fit the age. The country was full of confidence and anxiety about invention. Machines were changing labor, travel, agriculture, war, communication, and the rhythm of daily life. The same public that marveled at new devices also feared being surprised by them. A secret machine was exciting because it promised progress. It was unsettling for the same reason, because progress might arrive without warning, owned by someone else, controlled by someone else, and passing over your town before you had even heard its name. The airship wave fed on that combination. It helped that the reports were often specific enough to sound mechanical, but not specific enough to be tested. Witnesses saw lights, outlines, propellers, wings, cables, cabins, or men aboard. The details changed from place to place, yet each detail added texture. A report that should have become weaker through inconsistency, instead became richer as folklore. One town saw a cigar-shaped craft. Another heard voices. Another described a searchlight. Another said the machine landed. Another said the men aboard were repairing it. Another said they were collecting water. Another said they were bound for Cuba with weapons. The airship became a vessel for whatever the moment needed. In a country obsessed with invention, it was a secret machine. In a country reading about war and empire, it could carry guns. In a country fascinated by Mars, canals, and life beyond Earth, it could bring a pilot from another world. The explanation expanded because the object was never fixed. That is one of the quiet truths of the case. The mystery airship was most powerful when it stayed just out of reach. If someone had dragged a real machine into a town square and displayed its engine, the mystery would have become engineering. Instead, the airship remained mostly a moving light, a rumor with machinery attached, a promise that witnesses could describe, but no one could hold. This does not mean every witness invented what they saw. People may have seen real lights. They may have seen planets through haze, stars near the horizon, lanterns, balloons, distant fires, atmospheric effects, or experimental objects that were ordinary in scale but strange in context. The point is that the culture was ready to interpret those sights through one powerful expectation. Someone has built it, someone is flying it, and someone knows more than we do.
For me, that expectation is the hinge of the whole story. The airship did not need to be fully visible because the public imagination filled in the missing parts. A searchlight meant electricity. A dark outline meant a hull. A rumor of a pilot meant an inventor with a secret. And once you accept the hidden inventor, the next question becomes almost irresistible. If he can fly over California without being caught, where else can he go?
By early 1897, the answer seemed to be everywhere. The reports began moving east, and as they crossed the country, the airship changed. It became more talkative, more theatrical, and stranger than a simple machine should have been. The eastern phase of the airship wave felt less like a single object crossing the country, and more like a rumor learning how to travel. Reports appeared across the plains and into the Midwest and South. Nebraska, Kansas, Arkansas, Texas, and other states entered the map. Each place added its own witnesses, its own geography, and sometimes its own explanation. A person reading the papers in 1897 could follow the airship almost like a serialized adventure. One day, it was above a town in California. Later, a report placed it over Nebraska. Then, Kansas had a story. Then Texas. The path was not clean enough to track like a flight plan, but that did not hurt the legend. It made the craft feel elusive. The airship seemed to be everywhere and nowhere. In some accounts, people saw it from a distance, a light moving across the dark. In others, they encountered men who claimed to be part of the crew. The machine landed, at least in the printed versions, and the crew asked for water, food, directions, or supplies. They made strange statements about where they had come from and where they were going. These conversations are some of the most fascinating parts of the wave, because they pull the mystery down to human scale. A light in the sky is hard to question. A pilot standing near a landed craft can be asked what he is doing. But the answers in the reports often made the mystery deeper, not simpler. Some supposed crewmen hinted at secret test flights. Some suggested military errands. Others gave explanations so strange they felt like a joke told with a straight face. The airship was no longer only a technological rumor. It was becoming a stage. Small-town America supplied the audience. Newspapers supplied the spotlight. The pilots, whether imagined, misreported, or invented for copy, supplied the dialogue. One account might describe a practical machine needing repairs. Another might describe mysterious men who seemed to know exactly how incredible they sounded. Another might include references to faraway places that most readers would never see. The whole wave became a performance of modernity arriving in the most unlikely places: fields, roads, farms, churches, and town squares. There is a reason these stories often feel like folklore wearing a metal skin. Older legend forms had always brought strangers to the edge of the community. Travelers, spirits, prophets, wandering soldiers, hidden kings, men with secret knowledge. The airship wave updated that figure. Now the stranger did not arrive on horseback or on foot. He descended from the sky in a machine. That change made the old pattern feel new. The reports also created a strange democracy of witness. You did not have to live in a major city to be part of the future. In fact, the rural setting often made the story better. The airship over a farm suggested that tomorrow could appear anywhere. It did not need a university, a laboratory, or a government proving ground. It could choose your pasture. Aurora endured partly because of this pattern. A machine falling into a Texas windmill is almost perfectly shaped for American legend. It joins the cosmic and the local. Mars meets a small-town cemetery. A future craft hits a rural object that belongs to the older world. The collision is not just physical. It is symbolic. But before Aurora, there were many smaller collisions like that. Moments where the modern sky touched ordinary life. Witnesses described lights moving over farms. People claimed to hear mechanical noises. Some reports said the craft's searchlight swept across the ground. The beam itself became important. A searchlight is not passive. It does not merely glow. It looks. To be under a searchlight is to feel observed. That feeling changes the story. The airship was not only something people watched. In some accounts, it seemed to watch back. By the time the reports reached their most dramatic phase, the machine had gathered almost every ingredient later UFO stories would use. There were strange lights, ambiguous technology, official-sounding witnesses, elusive operators, local sightings, vanished proof, and a public argument over whether the whole thing was fact, fantasy, or something in between. The only piece missing was the language of the flying saucer. The shape had not yet changed. The emotional machinery was already running.
Here is where the airship wave starts to feel uncanny. Not because every report is equally strong. They are not. Some are distant lights. Some are newspaper copy with a very loose grip on evidence. Some sound like the kind of story a town tells because it is too good not to tell. But the pattern is hard to ignore. A craft appears. Witnesses gather. A source with a title or a respectable role gives the report weight. The evidence stays just out of reach. Then the story moves on, and the next town adds a little more. At that point, the sightings have become something larger, a storytelling machine.
And in the spring of 1897, that machine produced some of its strangest episodes. The airship stopped being only an invention ahead of its time. It became a vessel for Martians, impossible journeys, and one of the oddest cattle stories in American newspaper history. By the time the airship stories reached their wildest form, The reports had moved beyond simple observation. People were no longer only saying, "I saw a light." They were saying they had met the crew, heard where the crew came from, or watched something being taken. Those claims changed the emotional temperature of the wave. A distant light can be dismissed or debated. A conversation demands a different kind of attention. It turns the unknown into characters. Some accounts described airship men who seemed almost ordinary. They needed supplies. They repaired machinery. They talked like inventors or mechanics. They were secretive, but not necessarily supernatural. Other accounts drifted toward the impossible. There were stories of origins that did not fit normal geography. There were hints of Mars, at a time when the public imagination was already alive with speculation about the red planet. Astronomers and popular writers had made Mars feel like a possible neighboring world, not merely a red point in the night. Talk of canals on Mars had entered public culture. The idea of intelligent life there was not fringe in the way it would later sound. So when an airship pilot was linked to Mars, the claim landed in prepared soil. It sounded incredible, but not random. That matters because the most durable legends often attach themselves to ideas already circulating. The airship wave did not invent public fascination with Mars, secret technology, or hidden inventors. It braided them together. A machine from the sky could be earthly, otherworldly, or both, depending on what a newspaper needed that day. Then the animals entered the story. On April 23, 1897, the Yates Center Farmers Advocate published the now famous story associated with Alexander Hamilton of Leroy, Kansas. In the account, Hamilton and his family saw an airship hovering over his farm. It carried a red cable, or something like a cable, that became tangled around one of his heifers. The craft lifted. The animal was dragged into the air. The next day, the story said, the remains were found several miles away. The scene is grotesque and strangely modern. Decades later, stories of mutilated livestock and mysterious aircraft would occupy their own corner of American fringe culture. In 1897, here was a version with an airship, a farmer, a cable, and a missing animal, printed with names and rural detail. For a listener today, the Hamilton story almost feels too perfect. It sounds like someone reached forward into future UFO folklore and pulled back a piece before its time. But in its own moment, it also fit older frontier storytelling. Tall tales had always exaggerated the ordinary world into comic impossibility. A fish becomes enormous. A storm behaves like a living thing. An animal is carried off in a way no sober account would expect. The airship gave that tradition a new prop. The machine could do what the old tall tale needed: lift, vanish, astonish, and leave behind just enough physical consequence to make the listener lean in. We have to hold that tension carefully. The weirdest stories are not useless just because they are weird. They tell us what the airship had become in the public mind. It was no longer only a possible invention. It was a machine that could carry any anxiety, joke, hope, or fear the culture attached to it. If a town wanted to imagine secret progress, the airship could be an inventor's craft. If a town wanted mystery from beyond Earth, it could carry a Martian. If a storyteller wanted frontier absurdity, it could steal a cow. The vessel was flexible, and that flexibility made it spread. The same thing happens in many modern mysteries. The first report creates a shape. Later reports fill the shape with local details. One witness adds a government vehicle. Another adds strange writing. Another adds medical symptoms. Another adds an official who warns people not to talk. The details may conflict, but the larger story becomes more compelling because it feels populated. The mystery airship wave did that before the modern UFO age had a name for the process. It taught America how to connect scattered sightings into a single hidden event.
Okay, wait. A secret airship is one thing. A secret airship dragging a heifer into the sky is another. That is the moment where the story crosses a border. But I do not think we should throw the whole wave away because some versions became outrageous. The outrageous parts are evidence too, just not always evidence for the thing they claim. They show us how quickly the mystery became useful.
Useful stories often travel farther than tidy ones. The airship could be frightening, funny, prophetic, technological, religious, or alien, sometimes in the same week. The more it traveled, the more it absorbed. And then, in Aurora, Texas, it absorbed death. The Aurora story sits at the center of the airship wave because it gives the mystery what most sightings do not: an ending on the ground. A light can vanish into the sky. A pilot can disappear into rumor. A newspaper can print a correction or simply move on to the next curiosity. But a crash leaves a place. A windmill, a field, a cemetery, and a grave that later generations can try to find. S.E. Hayden's article, published on April 19, 1897, is the anchor. It is the source that gives the legend its date, its town, its landowner, and its extraordinary claim. The piece says the airship struck Judge Proctor's windmill on April 17th and broke apart. It says the pilot's remains were recovered. It says papers found near the body contained writing that could not be read. It says the craft was too badly wrecked to understand, though enough remained to suggest it was built of strange material. Then the article moves to the burial. That detail changes everything. Without it, the Aurora account would be a crash story. With it, the story becomes a community ritual. The town does not merely witness the strange. It receives it, handles it, and places it in sacred ground. A grave feels like a promise that something was there. It gives the story a point on the map. People can argue about lights, distances, weather, and memory. But a grave invites a different kind of investigation. You can walk to it. You can look for a marker. You can ask an old family whether they heard the story from grandparents. You can bring equipment and hope that the ground will answer what the article cannot. That is why the cemetery became almost as important as the sky. It turned a passing report into a place people could return to. Later, investigators returned to the cemetery because that promise was hard to ignore. In the 20th century, as UFO culture grew, Aurora began to look less like a forgotten newspaper oddity and more like a possible first chapter. Researchers, television crews, writers, and curious visitors came back to the town, looking for a marker, a metal reading, a witness memory, a family story, anything that could connect the printed account to physical reality. Later retellings introduced new figures and fragments. People spoke of a grave marker that had disappeared. Some claim pieces of unusual metal had once been found. Others remembered stories passed down through families. The trail did not become cleaner as it aged. It became more layered. Local legend often works that way. A printed article becomes a memory. A memory becomes a town story. A town story becomes a segment on television. A television segment sends new people looking for old evidence. Those searches then become part of the legend too. The source chain becomes an object in its own right. For Aurora, the chain is especially messy because the strongest contemporary piece is also the strangest. Hayden's article gives us the dramatic claim, but the broader contemporary record does not behave the way a verified crash of a non-human pilot should behave. The story exists, and it matters that it exists. But existence in print is not the same as confirmation on the ground. Still, the legend survived because it offered something powerful. It gave the airship wave a body. Modern UFO culture would return again and again to that idea. The mystery did not simply appear in the sky and vanish. It left behind bodies, debris, hidden files, witnesses who knew too much, and places where the public was not allowed to know what had happened. Aurora contains the early version in miniature. No vast military base. No atomic desert. No classified wreckage hangar. Just a North Texas town, a windmill, a cemetery, and a newspaper line about Mars. That smallness makes it haunting, and it also makes the case vulnerable. A legend this local depends on fragile evidence. One printed account, later memories, cemetery lore, and physical traces that are difficult to verify. The story asks us to imagine a dead visitor buried in plain sight, but it offers a paper trail that thins exactly where we want it to become solid. That tension is the reason Aurora still works as a story. It gives us the image we want and withholds the proof we need.
Aurora is where I get stuck. The image is almost impossible to forget. A small town burying a visitor from somewhere else. It is eerie, oddly compassionate, and cinematic in a way that feels built for legend. But the paper trail is thin. So the real question becomes sharper. Are we looking at an early crash case, or are we looking at a newspaper story that later generations learned to read through Roswell-colored glasses?
To answer that, we have to stop looking only at the sky and look at the machine that carried the whole way from town to town. The machine was not the airship. It was the newspaper. In the 1890s, a strange story could travel faster than the thing it described. Telegraph lines, exchanges between newspapers, clipped items, borrowed paragraphs, and competitive local editors created a kind of information weather. A vivid account in one place could be reprinted somewhere else, shortened, exaggerated, doubted, defended, or turned into the seed of a new local version. The mystery airship wave lived inside that system. None of that means nothing was seen. It means that seeing was only the first step. Publication, repetition, and imitation came after it. By the time the story reached a reader hundreds of miles away, it had become part of a national conversation about what might be moving through the sky. Newspapers had incentives that shaped the wave. A dull report did not travel well. A bright light over a city was good. A bright light with a crew was better. a craft landing near ministers was stronger. A pilot from Mars, a cow carried off by a cable, or a crashed airship with a dead body could command attention in a crowded newspaper page. The most dramatic versions were the most portable. This was not a modern problem. It was an old media problem running on different machinery. Before algorithms rewarded engagement, editors rewarded copy that readers repeated. Before social media turned mysteries into threads and reposts, newspapers turned them into columns and clippings. The basic pressure was familiar. Make the story vivid enough to move. The airship wave moved beautifully. It offered just enough consistency to feel connected, and just enough variation to stay fresh. The consistent pieces were simple. A craft, a light, a sense of control, secrecy, and motion across distance. The variations did the entertainment work. Different pilots, different explanations, different towns, different claims. A reader did not need every detail to match. In fact, the mismatches could make the phenomenon feel larger. If the airship was not always described the same way, perhaps there were several of them. If the crew gave different answers, perhaps they were hiding the truth. If the machine appeared in places far apart, perhaps it was faster than anyone imagined. Every inconsistency had a way to become intrigue. Mystery cultures endure partly for that reason. Contradiction does not always destroy belief. Sometimes it gives belief more rooms to explore. The airship wave also arrived at a moment when the line between report, satire, local humor, and promotional sensationalism could be blurry. A small-town paper might print a deadpan tall tale because readers understood the joke, while a distant paper might reprint it as if it were a serious claim. A local rivalry could become a mystery item. An editor could fill space with a story that sounded true enough to entertain. A witness account could be sincere and still mistaken. The result was not one clean category. The result was a mixture. The mixture protects us from two lazy answers. The first lazy answer says every witness was foolish or dishonest. That is too simple. People really did see lights, read reports, talk to neighbors, and experience the anxiety of a new technological age. The second lazy answer says the wave must have been one hidden machine because the reports exist. That is also too simple. Newspaper existence is not physical proof. The airship wave was powerful because it lived between those answers. It was a media event, a technological expectation, a folklore engine, and possibly a set of real observations interpreted through the strongest story available. By the time the wave had run its course, it had trained Americans in a pattern they would use again. Look up. See something strange. Ask whether the government, a hidden inventor, or visitors from somewhere else know more than they are saying. Search for debris. Search for bodies. Search for the official who slipped and said too much. When proof fails to appear, let the missing proof become part of the mystery. That pattern did not begin in 1947. It was already alive in 1897, traveling by ink, rumor, and the bright hunger of readers who wanted the sky to give them the future.
Here is where the story gets uncomfortable in a useful way. The newspaper machine does not make the mystery worthless. It explains how the mystery became national. A strange light can scare one town. A printed story can recruit 1,000 imaginations. So, when we ask what flew over America in 1896 and 1897, we have to ask two questions at once. What, if anything, was in the sky? And what was moving through the papers below it?
The final answer is not as clean as believers or skeptics might want. There was almost certainly no single craft that explains the entire wave, but something real was happening in American culture, and maybe in American skies. To find it, we have to separate the machines people described from the machinery that carried the descriptions. The first crack is technological. In 1896 and 1897, people were dreaming hard about controlled flight, and inventors were experimenting with airships, balloons, motors, and steering systems. But no documented American craft is known that matches the full mystery airship wave. One sighting, or even one experimental machine, is not the problem. The problem is the range, speed, reliability, night operations, repeated appearances across so many places, and the absence of a durable machine, patent trail, crew record, or confirmed wreckage. The age was close to flight. It was not that close. That does not mean no one saw anything. It means the single hidden super airship explanation carries more weight than the evidence can support. The second crack is corroboration. Many accounts live almost entirely in newspapers. Some are vivid. Some name people. Some include titles, towns, and dates. But the stronger the claim becomes, the more we need independent support. And the airship wave often gives us repetition instead of verification. Aurora is the clearest example. Hayden's article is real. The claim it prints is extraordinary. But a printed extraordinary claim is not the same as a confirmed crash, a confirmed body, or confirmed debris. Later investigations kept the story alive, but they also showed how much of the evidence chain depends on memory, local lore, missing objects, and retellings made long after the original article. The third crack is the tall tale problem. The Alexander Hamilton Heifer story is unforgettable, but later UFO historians connected it to a liar's club or tall tale context. Whether every detail of that later identification is handled perfectly or not, the broader warning is clear. At least some famous airship stories belong to a culture of deadpan exaggeration, local humor, and competitive storytelling. A cow lifted into the air by a red cable may tell us less about an aircraft and more about what happened when frontier humor found a new technological toy. The fourth crack is the newspaper engine itself. The airship wave behaved like a story moving through a media system. It grew more dramatic as it traveled. It borrowed motifs. It rewarded the most memorable versions. It turned lights into machines, machines into crews, crews into Martians, and one Texas windmill into a crash site before Roswell had even entered the American imagination. Taken together, those cracks do not erase the airship wave. They change what the mystery is. The sharper question is probably not which single craft crossed America in secret. It is why so many Americans found that idea believable, thrilling, and strangely necessary. Part of the answer is timing. America in the 1890s was standing at the edge of the air age. People knew flight was coming, but they did not know exactly when or in what form. That uncertainty created a space where rumor could feel like preview. A light in the sky could become tomorrow arriving early. Another part is media. Newspapers gave the sightings continuity. They made scattered reports feel like chapters. They let one town's mystery become another town's expectation. They turned isolated claims into a national weather pattern of wonder. The last part is imagination. The mystery airship was a bridge between older folklore and modern technological anxiety. It carried the old stranger from elsewhere story into an age of motors and searchlights. It replaced the ghostly carriage with a mechanical hull. It replaced the wandering prophet with a pilot. It replaced the omen with an aircraft. Aurora still feels powerful, even when the evidence thins, because the image is so complete. A dead pilot from Mars, buried in a Texas cemetery, is almost certainly not a verified event in the way believers would want it to be. But it is a perfect image of a culture rehearsing the future. A town receives the unknown. It tries to make it decent. It buries it. Then the evidence fades and the story survives. Decades later, when flying saucers entered the headlines, Americans did not have to invent every part of the pattern from scratch. They already had rural witnesses, strange craft, official-ish comments, vanished evidence, bodies from elsewhere, and the suspicion that someone knew more than the public was being told. The mystery airships were not modern UFO culture yet. They were one of its ancestors.
This is the part that stays with me. The airship probably was not one secret machine crossing the continent. Aurora probably was not a verified crash with a visitor from Mars in a hidden grave. But the panic was real in another way. People were learning how to look at the sky and turn uncertainty into a story about secrecy, technology, and the future. They were learning the emotional grammar of the modern UFO mystery before the modern UFO had a name. Maybe that is why the old reports still feel alive.
Picture the 1897 reader again. A newspaper lies open on the table. The room is lit by a lamp. Outside, the sky is dark, and somewhere beyond the window, there are stars, clouds, maybe a planet low on the horizon, maybe a distant light, moving in a way that does not quite make sense. The reader has just finished an article about an airship over another town. Perhaps it belongs to a secret inventor. Perhaps it came from somewhere farther away. Perhaps it crashed in Texas and left a body behind. Perhaps tomorrow's paper will explain it. He folds the newspaper and, for a moment, listens. The house is quiet. The world is still old in so many ways. Horses in the road, windmills in the fields, telegraph wires stretching across distance, and steam, smoke, and print carrying news from place to place. But overhead, the future feels close enough to cast a light. It is not proven, not captured, and not buried in a way anyone can now verify. Still, it feels close. That may be the real legacy of the mystery airships. They show us a country waiting for the sky to change, and when it did not change fast enough, imagination rose to meet it. Before Roswell, before saucers, before airplanes became ordinary, America looked up and saw a machine it could not find. Maybe nothing impossible flew over Aurora. Maybe no hidden inventor crossed the plains with a brilliant lamp and a secret crew. Maybe the airship was made of newspaper ink, misread lights, technological hunger, local jokes, and the old human need to turn the unknown into a visitor. But in the lamplit rooms of 1897, the story did what great mysteries do. It made the dark sky feel occupied.
I'm Tom Mackenzie. Thank you for listening to Unexplained History. Keep watching the old stories because sometimes the future appears there first.